go about developing solutions with JBoss ESB? Well, it's actually pretty easy because it's all a bunch of XML files in Java, so you just go and write that stuff and you're done. Okay, but that's no fun. And really, you want to be thinking up here, especially in SOA, because SOA is service-oriented architecture. It's not XML-oriented architecture. It's not even Java-oriented architecture. It's services. You want to be thinking in terms of services and think in terms of leveraging and defining services. So that's what we're really trying to get to in JBoss Tools here with the SOA. So basically, I go through and I create a project. We have a new service wizard we have in JBoss Tools, and this is talking about JBoss Tools version 3, which you can get, or if the product version is JBoss Developer Studio version 2, and we have some DVDs if you're interested in that as well, and you can download that as well. But we have a new project wizard. You can create an ESB project wizard, which will configure a lot of things for you. If you're familiar, again, with Eclipse and WTP, we use the notion of a facet, and we define an ESB facet, which tells the project how to interact with the ESB. But you can also add the ESB libraries to any project. It's effectively just adding a class path entry for you. And this is an example of what an ESB project looks like. So is anyone here familiar with the quick starts in our JBoss ESB platform? Yeah? No? Okay. So if you download JBoss ESB and you look down into the examples folder, you'll see a bunch of quick starts. And those are really great at getting a very quick understanding and ramping up into how JBoss ESB and how JBoss SOA works. But those are all run from Ant in the command line. And this is how it looks when it's integrated in with JBoss Tools for the server. So what we have is we have a project called Hello World. It has some source code associated with it, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And it has some meta information associated with it. It has a deployment XML, and it has this very important file called jbossesb.xml. So jbossesb.xml is really the file where the main service configuration happens, and obviously it's an XML file, you can tell that. What this project represents is what's called an ESB archive. So in JBoss SOA, what you do is you deploy these things called .esb archives out to AS, or whatever app server you happen to be running this in, and it gets unpacked, and that deploys services out into the service infrastructure that you can then call and use. So the ESB is a container for the services that you've developed. And this is basically a representation of what the ESB does. Using Web Tools platform technology in JBoss Tools, you can associate this project with your server connection, and it'll keep it updated automatically for you. And then you can run test clients against it and so on. So this is how it gets integrated. You can do this all by hand. You can drag and drop it, but you can also do it in the tools, and this gives you the integrated Java editor and so on. So the JBoss ESB configuration editor we have is what we call a structural editor. So it's not a graphical editor where you're sort of wiring things together, but it's not an XML editor where you're writing XML and trying to remember what was this and maybe getting some suggestions. It's somewhere in between the two, but it's pretty straightforward. Basically, we have two notions, and without going into too much detail about how to develop services here, we have the notion of providers and we have the notion of listeners and actions and services. So basically you have a number of providers, which is where you're going to get information in and out of. And then you have services that you define, which listen to these connections. And they have a thing called an action pipeline, which is what they do when they get data effectively. So basically, using this tool, you can go through and you can define what your services look like in terms of the actions that the service is going to perform. That's roughly semantics, and how it connects out to the outside world, its listeners and its providers. So the listeners reference providers, and the providers are various types like JMS and file system and FTP and JCA and so on and so on, right? So we have this editor. You could write this all by hand using an XML editor if you wish. Some people do. But a lot of people find this more friendly because it has wizards that pop up and help and guide you through things and allow you to create classes and so on. This is part of JBoss Tools 3. Go and get it. It's right there. This is the source view. It has, you notice down the bottom, there's a tree and there's a source view. So it has both. You can edit the source and it updates in the editor. So it's basically, you know, a two-way editor. If you want to look at the XML, you can do that. Sometimes you want to do that. It's easier, faster, whatever, curious. So basically, what else was in that project was some Java code. And here's an example of an ESB action. So this defines the semantics of what your service is actually going to do. And in this case, it's very simple. Now, obviously, it extends a standard action out of the ESB. And you get a constructor, and we're basically just storing away from the configuration information, which is pretty obvious what it should be. It's just information that's passed to your service on startup, context information. And then you get a method, which is called display message, and we've exposed this method as a service method, and you can call this. So you know, based on your service contract, that this is a method you can call. And this does something very simple, which is pretty obvious, is it gets the message body and it prints it out to the command line. So you can do this today. If you go and download JBoss ESB and you go to the Quick Starts folder, there's a README file, and it's very simple. You run one command window here and you do this, and you run the other command window here and you do this, and you'll see that you pass in a message which says hello world, and you see hello world come out here. Well, you can do that all in JBoss tools as well. So you get the ability to do this both, and this is really a great way to get into how to develop services for JBoss. So, likewise, here's the test code. Now, this wasn't in the project that I just showed you, but I have a separate project that I could create that has the test code, and effectively what this is doing is this is going off and creating a connection out to my server, and then it creates this thing down the, let's see, right here, it creates a session queue. So basically what this is going to do is this is going to drop a message onto a queue, and the service that I created is listening on that queue. It's going to pick up the message and do something with it. In this case, it just prints out the message body. So this is what the client code looks like. And again, this is all easily available to you because it's in the Quick Starts. And we have an examples plugin for JBoss Developer Studio that actually has a lot of these examples you can import directly in your workspace, so it makes your life a bit easier. But you see, the code is not a lot. You have to write some code, but it's not particularly terrible. Also, an important part of developing SOA solutions is the ability to define business rules. And we have a very robust and large suite of tools around our Drools framework. So Drools ships with a large number of Eclipse tools for developing and testing and running and debugging rules. And it's actually a very mature and very good set, and that's rolled up into SOA, into the SOA tooling for JBoss SOA. So here, you know, we define some rules. You see you have the standard type of an editor that you would expect for code. I didn't actually show it on here, but you have a diagrammatic tree for the flow of the rule and so on. If you're interested in more rules, we do have quite a few people here, experts, and we do have a Drools boot camp that's going on at the Hilton up on Kearney Street that you might be aware of as well. So if you're in the Drools community, that's a separate event that's happening, but also happening this week. And the Drools team is there, and you can go and talk to them in great detail about this sort of stuff as well. In addition, there's folks around the booth you can speak to as well.